Welcome to The Explainer. We're jumping right into a massive shift in global diplomacy. A whole wave of European nations has just formally recognized the state of Palestine. So the big question is, what does any of this actually change on the ground?
Okay, let's get right into it. For decades, really, the map of who recognizes Palestine has looked pretty much the same. But then, in just one single incredible week, that map was completely redrawn in Europe. And it might just signal a whole new chapter in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict.
It all kicked off with Portugal on September 21st. Then, just a day later, boom, France follows suit. After that, it felt like a diplomatic domino effect. Luxembourg, Malta, Belgium, and a bunch of others all jumped in. This wasn't just a few random announcements. This was a major coordinated break from decades of established policy. To really get why this past week is so huge, we have to rewind a bit and look at the long history of diplomatic gridlock that came before it. That context is exactly what makes this sudden change so momentous. Now, here's a really crucial piece of context. The idea of recognizing Palestine isn't new at all. In fact, more than 140 nations around the world, especially in the global south and the Arab world, have recognized it for years. The novelty here, the real story, isn't the recognition itself. It's who is doing the recognizing now, major Western European powers. For years, the official stance from the European Union was pretty clear. Support a two-state solution? Absolutely. But hold back on formally recognizing Palestine. The idea was to use recognition as this powerful bargaining chip, right? A final reward to be given at the end of a successful peace process. But with that peace process basically collapsed for years now, that position became harder and harder to hold. So if that's been the status quo for so long, what was the tipping point? What finally changed? Well, it turns out it wasn't just one single thing, but more like a perfect storm of pressures all coming together at once. You had this convergence of three incredibly powerful forces. First, the sheer scale of the destruction and the civilian casualties in the recent Gaza war created this intense humanitarian pressure. That was then amplified by massive public protests all across the continent, with people demanding their governments do something. And then, strategically, there was this growing fear that the window for a viable two-state solution was slamming shut for good because of what was happening on the ground. And you can see this complete flip in thinking right here, in a resolution that was passed by the European Parliament itself. The whole argument just got turned on its head. Instead of being the prize at the end of a peace deal, recognition was totally reframed as a last-ditch effort to keep the very idea of that process alive. So, how has this decision landed on the world stage? Well, as you might expect, the reactions could not be more polarized. This move has drawn some really deep lines in the sand. Israel and its key allies have strongly condemned the move. The argument, which you can see articulated here by Italy's prime minister, is that this kind of unilateral recognition essentially rewards hostile factions and undermines the whole peace process by removing any incentive to negotiate. Italy, for instance, has even put conditions on its own potential recognition, saying it depends on the exclusion of Hamas and the release of all hostages. On the flip side, for Palestinians, this wave of recognition is seen as a historic, long overdue validation of their right to self-determination. It's viewed as a critical step toward finally achieving equal standing on the international stage and strengthening their claims to sovereignty. And this really gets to the heart of the whole disagreement, doesn't it? What one side sees as a dangerous precedent that rewards violence, the other sees as a necessary correction to a historic imbalance. They are looking at the exact same action and seeing two completely different realities. And looking beyond the immediate players, the United States is staying pretty cautious, sticking firmly with Israel's position. Meanwhile, Arab states have unanimously applauded the European shift, and within the EU, its own leadership is trying to frame all of this as a constructive step, one that keeps the hope for a two-state solution alive. But okay, let's get practical for a minute. What does recognition actually mean? Fundamentally, it's a political act. It doesn't create borders or build institutions overnight, but what it does do is declare one state's intention to treat another as a sovereign equal. And that opens the door for a whole new level of diplomatic engagement. So the crucial thing to understand here is that this is really a story of symbolic victories versus very real practical hurdles. Recognition gives a massive boost to international legitimacy, and it could strengthen Palestine's standing in places like the International Criminal Court. But, and this is a huge but, It doesn't define borders, it doesn't remove settlements, and it doesn't solve the immense governance and security challenges on the ground.
This sudden flurry of diplomatic action has really pushed the entire conflict into a new and deeply uncertain chapter. So what are the key things we need to be watching for now? There are 3 immediate questions. First, are the dominoes going to keep falling? Countries like Spain and Ireland have already signaled they're ready to join. Second, is this going to create a permanent fracture within the European Union itself? And third, will this growing chorus of allies put real pressure on the United States to maybe rethink its long-held position? And you can see that division pretty clearly here. Europe is no longer monolithic on this issue. You have the new bloc of nations that have recognized Palestine, a group that's actively considering it, and a pretty significant camp of hesitant states, like Germany, that are citing historical ties and security concerns with Israel. Navigating this split is going to be a major challenge for EU diplomacy moving forward. Ultimately, this is the question that Europe, and really the whole world, has to confront now. For Palestinians, it's a moment of long-awaited validation. For Israel, it's a dangerous precedent. And for Europe, it's a gamble, a symbolic act meant to keep hope alive. Whether that symbol can ever transform into a real spark for peace, that remains the great unanswered question.